Over the past 2 years, you could consider the Jazz to be overachievers. These were teams that were expected to be towards the bottom of the standings, but at least for the past 2 years early on in the year, they were competing for play-in spots when nobody really expected them to be there. And so as a result, they've been trading veterans over the past few seasons. They traded a guy like Mike Conley to Minnesota 2 years ago. Last year, they traded guys like Simone Fontecchio, Kelly Olynyk. These were players that were helping the Jazz win games, so the front office kind of had to weigh multiple options. They could have said, yes, we can keep these guys, keep winning games, be competitive, and maybe make the play-in and sneak into the playoffs. Or we can move on from these guys, worsen our record in the second half of the year, and get better draft picks. So when I'm looking at players on this team that could be traded this year, the first guy I'm looking at is Jordan Clarkson. He's 32 years old now. He only has 2 years left on his deal, and Utah is in a rebuilding mode. He can create his own shot, he can space the floor, and he's just going to give you that offensive spark off your bench. He is coming off a bit of a down season. Jordan Clarkson is somebody who's always been pretty inefficient when we just look at field goal percentage and three-point percentage. An encouraging sign, though, is that he's played pretty well for Utah in the playoffs. He's played 24 playoff games with the Jazz, and in those games he's averaged 17 points on 45% from the field. He's shot 35% from 3 on 7 attempts per game, and then over 90% from the free throw line. So with that type of offensive production, there are going to be playoff teams that are interested in him. He's not too great on defense, but if he's giving you that type of bench scoring during the playoffs, there are going to be teams that want that and are willing to trade some stuff to the Jazz for him. Then you have Colin Sexton, who's 25, and John Collins, who's 27. Sexton still has 2 years left on his deal, and then John Collins has 1 year plus a player option, which I think he'll probably accept. Both of these guys played pretty well for the Jazz last year. Utah is a team that's really trying to just establish an identity as a 5-out team. That's a big reason why John Collins was starting at the 5 and not a guy like Walker Kessler. Collins shot 37% from 3 last year, which paired well with Lauri Markkanen, and it just provided so much spacing for a guy like Colin Sexton. Sexton is someone who was struggling early in the year coming off the bench. He wasn't doing too well in that role, but then in December he became a regular starter. And if you look at the numbers, he was just way better as a starter than he was coming off the bench. The thing with these two is that they're not too great on defense, and for a Jazz team who ranked dead last in defensive rating last year, you want to change that and bring in good defenders. As I mentioned earlier, Colin Sexton will be a free agent in 2 years, and this Jazz team has young guards like Keontae George, Isaiah Collier. Colin Sexton is a nice player, but he's not an all-star or superstar level player. It just might not make sense financially to bring him back, especially when you have other young guards on this team that you're trying to grow and develop. So even though Sexton is still pretty young at 25, I could see the Jazz moving him. Then in John Collins' case, he's not as bad a defender as Sexton. The thing is, John Collins is making $26.5 million this season, and then he has a player option for next year to make the exact same amount. Even though John Collins increased his value this past year, I feel like $26.5 million is a bit of a steep price for him, and I could see some teams either being hesitant to trade for him or just not willing to really give that much up for him. I don't know if the Jazz will be able to trade Clarkson, Collins, and Sexton, but if they can trade any of those guys and get some sort of assets back for them, that will just justify being able to hold on to Lauri Markkanen. I know that a lot of people want the Jazz to trade Markkanen. He's 27 years old, Utah is not ready to compete anytime soon, so it would make sense to trade him and just bring in more picks, more young players. The thing is, Utah already has an abundance of young players and draft picks. Between Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, they got back 7 first-rounders and 3 pick swaps. They have 10 first-round draft picks over the next 4 drafts, so they don't exactly need draft picks right now. On top of that, Utah isn't exactly a free agent destination for stars, and Lauri wants to stay there. I get why so many teams are interested in him. He's one of those players that could fit seamlessly with any team. He plays so well without the ball, he can space the floor so well, he moves without the ball very well. He doesn't need too many dribbles to score, and that just prevents the offense from slowing down or turning into a situation where a bunch of guys are just watching him play iso ball. It's easy to look at a guy with his skill set and project him on better teams like the Warriors or the Kings or the Thunder and want them to trade for him. But again, if you have a guy who has such a unique skill set, a guy who can seamlessly fit with so many players, I don't see why you wouldn't want to keep him if you're Utah. Sure, he's not young by NBA standards, but at 27 years old, he's just entering his prime, and I think with his skill set, being a guy that doesn't heavily rely on athleticism, I think that he could be really good over the next 8 or 9 years. And if that's the case, Utah could just build a team over the next few years, keep bringing in young talent, and then still benefit and get all-star level play from Lauri. Utah's also going to be in contention for the top pick in the 2025 draft. and say you get the #1 pick and you draft a guy like Cooper Flagg. I think that if you're Cooper Flagg, you'd be excited to come to Utah knowing how much young talent they have, knowing how much draft capital they have, but you'd be even more excited knowing that on top of all that, they have an all-star level player already in Lauri Markkanen. It makes you feel comfortable knowing that you already have a co-star there, and then with all the assets they have, all the young talent they have the potential to draft, develop, or trade for a third-star player. And look, you could always trade Lauri Markkanen later. He's ineligible to be traded this season just because of when he signed that extension, but if you get a young player in next year's draft that you're excited about, I think it's worth experimenting playing him next to Lauri Markkanen and just seeing how that pairing goes. If you try that out for a little while and you're just finding that it's not working, that's okay because Lauri Markkanen is still going to have a ton of trade value. He'll only be like 28 or 29 at that time. He's still going to have multiple years left on his deal, and his skill set isn't going to change. He's still going to be a guy who is viewed as a seamless fit with any team, a guy who can play next to other star players, and a guy that can really just elevate a playoff team to a potential contender. So yeah, you could trade him then, you could still get great value for him. If they do decide to hold on to him like I think they should, that brings me to my next question about this team, which is who is going to be that star next to Lauri. They drafted a few new players this year, with the first being Cody Williams. Before the draft, I watched an interview that Williams did, and I just really liked the maturity he was showing. He was talking about wanting to make an impact on defense, wanting to just come in and play whatever role the team asked of him, do whatever the team asked of him, and I think that's a really mature response to hear from someone his age. There's a lot of guys who come into the league and they want to just score a lot, they want to get a lot of touches, a lot of minutes, especially when they come to a rebuilding team like the Jazz. But to see him come across as someone that looks very unselfish should make Jazz fans excited. He also said that he's been working on his ball handling in the offseason, and that's something that I think is really exciting because we see a lot of forwards nowadays that can handle the ball, push the ball, set up the offense. And if Cody Williams can become one of those guys that can reliably handle the ball, attack downhill, and then kick out to shooters, that bodes really well for his potential fit with Lauri and his fit with the rest of this young core. The Jazz also took Isaiah Collier with the 29th pick, which to me was just a huge steal. Collier was the #1 ranked recruit in his high school class, and even though he didn't fully live up to the hype at USC, he showed why he had that potential and why he had that ranking. This is someone who's a very strong, explosive guard, and that just allows him to really get downhill whenever he wants, put so much pressure on the rim, and that's what you need in the NBA. You need a guard who can just attack and put pressure on the defense, create advantages for himself and for his teammates. I expect Isaiah Collier to be an effective ball handler in the league. The question with him is just his jump shot. He's shown ability as a catch and shoot three-point shooter, but if his best ability is going to be when he has the ball in his hands, attacking the basket, you want to see him be able to knock down off the dribble threes. He wasn't great on those shots at USC, so I want to see him improve that. And then defensively, you just want to see what kind of impact he's going to make on that end as well. Lastly, Utah took Kyle Filipowski with the 32nd pick. He's just one of those bigs that can really pass, handle, and shoot the ball. That's a skill set that teams really value out of their bigs nowadays. And if he can couple that with at least solid defense, he's going to be one of the biggest steals in this draft. The Jazz also have some intriguing players going into year 2. The guy who interests me the most is Taylor Hendricks. He didn't play a whole lot during his rookie year, but he did play more during the second half of the year. And what he showed is just a lot of defensive versatility. He's someone who just has so much athleticism. He projects to be a guy who can play multiple positions. And then while he's not super dynamic offensively, he showed an ability to knock down the three. He shot just under 38% from three as a rookie. And if you combine that perimeter shooting with his potential defensive versatility, that seems like a guy that would just be a perfect fit with the Jazz. They want to play a 5-out offense, and he's someone who can shoot the three. Then obviously this team really struggled defensively last year, so having a guy like Taylor Hendricks would just be so key for them. Then there's Keontae George, who showed lots of potential as a shooter and playmaker. His three-point percentage wasn't too great as a rookie, but that's in large part because of the types of shots he was taking. He was taking lots of threes off the dribble, pulling up in defenders' faces. He was taking shots where he was just running off screens into threes. He wasn't just taking wide open catch and shoot threes, so even though the percentage wasn't super high, I am excited about the fact that he showed that he can hit threes in multiple ways, and that he's not just relying on other players to set him up. Because he showed that he can hit threes off the dribble, that just opened up passing opportunities for him. Keontae George is someone who can make passes into tight windows, and that's something that's going to be really key playing in the pick and roll. If you're a guard that can hit pull-up threes coming off screens, and then you can get the defense to bite on your shots and then dump off to your teammates rolling to the rim. That's a skill set that could make him a really effective offensive player. Now, I do have some fears about Keontae. Going to the basket, he's not the best. He settled for a lot of tough shots going to the rim because he wasn't really able to just blow by his defender and get a huge step on them going to the basket. And even though he was able to make some tough shots going to the rim, I don't know if you want to rely on a guy to make those types of shots night in and night out. So with that being said, I do have some concerns about him being a lead ball handler, but he could still be a good secondary ball handler. And I think the fact that the Jazz have Isaiah Collier, a guy who's really explosive, has potential attacking downhill, kicking out to shooters, they might fit well together simply because Collier can take some pressure off of Keontae. The thing with those two is that they may not be the best defensive pairing. Keontae George wasn't great on defense as a rookie, and then we'll have to see how Isaiah Collier is defensively, but the idea of having two smaller guards playing next to each other in the backcourt may not be too great a look defensively, but we'll see. Maybe they can find success if they play next to versatile defenders like Cody Williams or Taylor Hendricks. Speaking of defense, that brings me to the next young guy on this team, which is Walker Kessler. Kessler is going to be going into his third NBA season, and his second year was a bit of a disappointment in some people's eyes. Coming into his second season, there was this expectation that he was going to build upon that exciting rookie year. But what happened is he was the starter at the beginning of the season. The Jazz found that he just didn't fit playing next to John Collins and Lauri Markkanen, so he ended up coming off the bench and John Collins was starting at the 5. As I've talked about, Utah is really prioritizing a 5-out offense, and Walker Kessler is someone who's just not a threat from the 3-point line. He's also not a great free throw shooter, and then he's not a really great passer as well. So sure, he's still a very impactful rim protector. He's someone who can make the defense better, but there's two sides of the ball. He makes an impact on defense, but if he's someone who's kind of a hole for them offensively, who kind of negatively affects what they're trying to run on offense, then yeah, I can understand why it's hard to justify playing him high minutes and making him that starter. So this year, I'm really interested to see how his offensive game develops. Because if he can become an offensive player that the Jazz can rely upon, and then he's still giving you that really good defense, you could run lineups with maybe him at the 5, next to guys like Taylor Hendricks, Lauri Markkanen, Cody Williams. It's just going to be interesting to see how all these young guys fit together, how they fit playing next to Lauri Markkanen. The Jazz aren't going to be good this year, so they just have to be experimental and see what works, see what doesn't. Utah is just going to have so many young players in the rotation, guys who are still adjusting to the league, finding their footing in the league. I talked about guys like Cody Williams, Isaiah Collier, Kyle Filipowski, Keontae George, Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler. That's 6 young guys who fit that category of young guys trying to find their way in the league. And then I didn't even mention guys like Bryce Sensabaugh or Johnny Juzang. And sure, you have a guy like Lauri Markkanen who can't be traded this year, but I did mention that players like Colin Sexton, John Collins, Jordan Clarkson are 3 impactful players that could be traded. So with all that being said, I have the Jazz finishing last in the Western Conference. This is not a bad thing for the Jazz at all. This would just give them a better chance at the top pick. And then on top of that, they have unprotected picks from Minnesota and Cleveland this year. So they could have 3 first-round draft picks in a really, really good draft. I feel like Utah's rebuild is just really being slept on. As I touched on, they have a lot of young guys with a variety of skills. Then you have Lauri Markkanen, who's an all-star level player. You have a bunch of picks, so you could trade for stars in the future or just bring in whatever young talent you want. They just have so many options going forward, and I think we need to start talking more about how bright their future really is. Anyways, that's going to be all for today's video. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts down in the comments section below. With all of that being said, I'm out, and I'll see you in the next video.